I thought I was walking into a normal HR meeting about performance concerns. I'd spent the night before printing emails, highlighting tasks in our project system, lining up dates so I could prove, calmly, that the mess my team was in wasn't mine. I wasn't planning a fight, just a conversation where I could finally say, "Here, this is what actually happened." That morning, I stopped by the internal mailroom and asked the receptionist if my documents had come up from records. She didn't even look twice, just grabbed a thick sealed envelope from the rack, checked my name on her list, and slid it across the counter. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened it, expecting to see my own notes and forms. Instead, I pulled out a stack of papers with my coworker's name at the top. Same department, same project, different story. The first page was a summary of client complaints. The second was a draft of a disciplinary action. On the third page, in clean corporate language, was a sentence that made my stomach drop. It blamed me for decisions I never made. I remember the exact moment I realized what I was holding. The office noise around me, printers, keyboards, phones, went flat, like someone had turned down the world. I'd asked if they'd picked up my documents. They handed me the blueprint for how they were planning to ruin my career. I stared at that sentence so long the text started to blur. My first instinct was that I had to be reading it wrong. Maybe it was another project. Maybe there was another person with my name. But there it was, my full name, the project code I'd been living inside for the past year, and a neat little paragraph about repeated failure to follow procedure, an unwillingness to take ownership. I swallowed and forced myself to breathe. Freaking out in the middle of an open-plan office was the one thing I couldn't afford. I set the paper down, flipped it back to the front, and read the header again. It was clearly meant for HR and my manager. My coworker's name was in the employee field. Mine was scattered through the pages as the convenience scapegoat. He wasn't even in yet. His chair, 3 blocks of desks away, was still empty. Jacket missing from the back, of course. He never came in before 9:30 unless there was a photo op with someone more important. I'd been with the company for 3 years. Mid-level, nothing glamorous. I was the guy people forwarded things to when they didn't know where else they went. The sort of person you only noticed when something went wrong. And even then, only long enough to hand them another mess. I'm not saying that to play the victim, just to explain why that envelope scared me more than any angry client ever had. Because if someone like me was officially labeled the problem, nobody was going to ask too many questions. The HR meeting had come up on my calendar 2 days earlier. Performance and development check-in. 30 minutes with my manager, Laura, and someone from HR I didn't know well. A woman named Denise. The subject line was so vague it sounded harmless, but everyone knew that format. It was the one they used when something was already decided and they just needed you to align with it. I flipped deeper into the stack. There were bullet points describing missed deadlines I could date to the hour. And I knew exactly who had pushed those deadlines, who had approved the changes, who had decided to just send it and fix it later. There were quotes from emails, except the quotes weren't complete. Half a sentence pulled from a chain I remembered staying up past midnight to finish. Whoever had written this had been careful. Careful enough to build a narrative, not careful enough to expect it to land in my hands. My fingers left little crescent moons in the edge of the paper. I forced myself to relax my grip. Panicking wouldn't change what I was seeing. If anything, this was the first time in months that the picture in my head and the picture on paper actually matched. Not in content, but in intent. For the first time, I could see that there really was a story being told about me behind closed doors. I sat back in my chair, letting the cheap plastic squeak under my weight, and did what I always do when I don't know what to do. I started mentally lining things up. Dates, names, who was in which meeting, who had access to which system, how many times my coworker, Matt, had fixed something after the fact and told me not to worry about it. Matt was Loud, not just his voice, though that too. Loud in the way he moved through the office, the kind of guy who high-fived people in hallways and made jokes during all hands, who brought donuts for the team, and then tagged the company on Instagram so leadership would see it. He was good at talking about work. I was good at doing it. You can probably guess which one of us was more visible. When a project went well, it was Matt's team. When something slipped, it was, "Can you talk to my name about his process?" I'd let that slide longer than I should have, telling myself it was politics, that it would balance out if I just kept my head down and kept delivering. That's who I'd always been, the person who did the right thing quietly and hoped someone up top was keeping score. Looking at those pages, I realized someone had been keeping score, just not for me. I checked the time on my monitor, 9:07 a.m. The meeting was at 10. I had 53 minutes to decide whether I was going to pretend I'd never seen any of this. I could already hear the company line if I tried to bring it up. "Those documents are confidential. You shouldn't have opened them. Let's focus on your behavior." I rubbed a hand over my face and forced myself to read one more page, slowly. There was a section about pattern of resistance to leadership direction. They had cited a specific incident where I'd pushed back on skipping a compliance step. In their version, I was obstructive and unwilling to adapt. In mine, I'd flagged a risk that later turned into an actual issue. In their report, that part was missing. I thought about the pile of emails I'd printed at home, the ones sitting in a neat folder in my backpack under my desk. I thought about the annotated screenshot I'd made of the task board, with our initials next to each card and the timestamps when they'd moved. I hadn't done any of that planning to attack anyone. I'd done it because I was tired of walking into conversations with feelings when everyone else had data. Now I had more data than I'd ever wanted. Across the aisle, someone laughed too loudly at a joke. A Slack notification popped up in the corner of my screen, asking if I was joining the weekly stand-up. My hands moved on autopilot, typing, "Running a bit late. I will catch up via notes." I muted the channel. I couldn't sit in a circle and talk about roadblocks while holding a document that basically described my exit route. I gathered the pages into a neat stack, squared them on my desk, and slid them back into the envelope. I didn't take photos. I didn't forward anything to my personal email. I knew exactly how that would look if this ever escalated, and after seeing my name in corporate legalese, I finally believed it could. Instead, I reached down, unzipped my backpack, and pulled out my own folder. My hands shook a little as I laid my notes side by side with the phrases I'd just read. Missed client deadline, Q3 rollout. I had the exact day the scope changed. The email where Matt told me, "I already cleared it with Laura, just push it." Failure to escalate risk. I had the ticket where I'd tagged both of them asking for a decision, and the date stamp showing they'd waited a week to reply. The gap between their story and mine wasn't abstract anymore. It was measurable. It was sitting right in front of me. I don't know how long I sat there matching phrases in their report with lines in my emails. But at some point, my heartbeat stopped galloping and fell into a slow, steady rhythm. It was the feeling I get when a messy spreadsheet finally lines up and every total matches. If they wanted to turn this into a story about my performance, fine. Stories are just sequences of facts arranged in a way that benefits someone. They had theirs. For the first time, I realized I had the beginnings of mine. I didn't go to HR right away, not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to finish mapping the picture in my head. If I walked into that meeting unprepared, they'd flatten me. If I walked in angry, they'd dismiss me. So I stayed at my desk, forcing myself to breathe evenly while the office slowly filled with the usual morning noise. Chairs scraping, keyboards waking up, someone unwrapping a granola bar too loudly. But underneath all that, something in me had shifted. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was studying them. I reopened my laptop and pulled up our task system. Line by line, I went through every card tied to the project they were hanging around my neck. The timestamps matched my memory. My updates were consistent, documented, boringly precise. Matt's updates, meanwhile, were sudden jumps. Tasks marked complete without notes. Deadlines pushed without explanation. Comments added hours after the fact, like he was trying to cover footprints. I'd always assumed he was sloppy. Now it read more like intent. I checked my inbox next. Over 100 threads between him, our manager, and me. I filtered by date. Cross-checked escalations. Screenshotted only what logically connected. Not the whole threads. Not anything that could be twisted into unauthorized data copying. Just the visible pieces I knew I would need. The ones tied directly to my work. Then, just as I finished labeling the last screenshot, a thought hit me so sharply I actually froze mid-motion. If they'd been building a case against me, how many times had I handed them everything they needed? Every time I stayed late to finish something Matt had abandoned. Every time I patched up a mistake quietly because it keeps the team moving. Every time I let him take credit because arguing wasn't worth the tension. I hadn't just made it easy for them, I'd made it normal. But that was just the beginning. I slipped the screenshots into a private, work-approved notes folder, one they encouraged us to use during evaluations. Nothing illegal, nothing out of line. Just the facts, curated and time-stamped, a mirror to their story. At 9:36, Matt finally walked in, loud as always, laughing at something on his phone, greeting people by name, acting like the office was a stage and he was the long-awaited headliner. He dropped his backpack onto his chair and gave his usual mornin' champ nod in my direction. Then he sat down and immediately opened a YouTube tab. He had no idea. I watched him through the reflection in my monitor. He didn't even seem tense. No sign that he knew an envelope full of his disciplinary papers had been in my hands less than an hour earlier. That alone told me something important. He wasn't worried, because he thought the script was already written. I checked the time again. 9:47. 13 minutes until the meeting. I gathered my folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood up. For a moment, my legs felt heavier than they should have, like gravity had quietly doubled. But once I started walking toward HR, the weight shifted into something steadier. Focused, controlled. Denise, the HR rep, was at her desk when I arrived. She looked up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was good at her job, I'll give her that. But I'd seen that smile used on people right before they walked out with a cardboard box. "Morning," she said. "Your meeting is in conference room B? They should be there shortly." "Before that," I said, keeping my voice flat, "there was an issue with the internal mail this morning." Her posture changed, subtle but real. "An issue?" "I was handed the wrong envelope," I said. "It wasn't mine. It contained documentation about another employee. I want to make sure that's logged as a distribution error." For a split second she looked alarmed, not at me, but at the implications. "You opened it?" she asked carefully. "It had my name on the list," I said. "I assumed it was mine. Once I realized it wasn't, I came straight here." That was true enough. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I hadn't copied it. I hadn't even kept a note. I didn't need to. I only needed the question it raised. Denise exhaled, nodded, opened a form on her screen. "Thank you for reporting it. We'll correct the record and make sure it's addressed." But her fingers didn't move with the confidence I'd expected. She was choosing her words, choosing what not to say. "And," I added lightly, as if it were an afterthought, "some of the statements in that packet mention me by name, in contexts that don't match my project records." Her hands paused just above the keyboard. "Did you speak with your manager about that?" she asked. "I wanted to bring it to HR first," I said, "just to understand how statements like that are being evaluated." For the first time, she didn't mask her reaction. Her eyes flicked up to mine, assessing, recalibrating, not hostile, not sympathetic, just awake, the kind of look that means something's gone wrong. "Let's," she said slowly. Make sure we have everything documented properly, and then we'll proceed with the meeting." Her voice had changed. Not by much, but enough. I stepped back from her desk and waited in the hallway, watching people pass by with coffee cups and half-finished conversations. The office felt normal for them. For me, it felt like the hinges of a door had just loosened, and something inside me loosened too. That night, I stopped being the hero. I wasn't going to fix anything quietly anymore. I wasn't going to let someone else set the narrative. The meeting wasn't going to be about my performance. It was going to be the first time I told the truth without apologizing for it. And I had no intention of walking out of that room alone. The conference room was too bright. Overhead LEDs hummed with that cold, office-white sharpness that makes everything look cleaner and crueler than it really is. A rectangular table, 3 chairs on each side, a pitcher of water no one ever touched. The sort of room where bad news was supposed to sound professional. Laura, my manager, was already inside when I walked in. Matt sat next to her, legs casually crossed, phone still in his hand like he'd been dragged away from something important. He didn't look nervous, which told me everything I needed to know about how he thought this meeting would go. Denise from HR took the seat across from me. She had a notebook open, pen ready, but she didn't make eye contact. Not the usual pre-rehearsed warmth. More like someone bracing for impact. "Thanks for joining," Laura began, her tone soft but rehearsed. "We wanted to check in on some concerns regarding your performance on the Q3 integration project." There it was, the script. I folded my hands on the table and waited. "We've noticed," she continued, "a pattern of missed deadlines and reluctance to follow leadership direction. We want to understand what's going on." Matt leaned back, arms crossed, wearing the exact expression of someone listening to a podcast he'd already heard. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I let the silence stretch one heartbeat too long. "Okay," I said finally. "Then let's talk specifics. Which deadline?" Laura blinked. She wasn't expecting that question so early. "Well, multiple?" "Pick one," I said calmly. "If it's a pattern, there should be several." She hesitated, not long, but noticeably. Her eyes flicked sideways toward Matt, and he looked suddenly very interested in the pattern of the table grain. "The Phase 2 rollout," she said at last. "Client deliverables were delayed nearly a week." "Right," I said. "Phase 2. Can you confirm the date the scope changed?" Laura's eyebrows pulled together. "It didn't change." I opened my folder and slid a printed email forward, the one with Matt's exact words copied and time-stamped. "I have written confirmation here," I said quietly, "from Matt, saying he'd already cleared the change with you and that I should push the deadline. That message is dated 2 weeks before the delay you're referencing." Matt's posture snapped out of its lazy lean. "That's okay, but that was just a suggestion," he said. "We talked about it later and decided not to Where's that written?" I asked. "What?" "The reversal," I said. "If leadership changed the decision, there should be a written update somewhere. Email, task comments, meeting minutes, anything." He opened his mouth, closed it, turned to Laura. She didn't look back at him. I continued, voice steady, unhurried. "And regarding failure to escalate risk, I'd like to review that too." Denise shifted in her seat, not uncomfortable. "Alert." I slid another page forward. "This is the ticket where I tagged both of you asking for a decision. It sat for 7 days without a response. The system logs show exactly when each of you viewed it." Now the silence in the room wasn't mine. It belonged entirely to them. Matt swallowed hard. "Look, maybe there was a misunderstanding, but—" "There was no misunderstanding," I said. "There was a pattern, just not the one described in the statements I saw." 3 pairs of eyes snapped up at that. Laura's confusion sharpened into something else, something that looked a lot like fear. Denise finally spoke. "What statements?" I met her gaze evenly. "This morning," I said, "I was handed an internal envelope that wasn't mine. I didn't read more than I had to, just enough to realize it mentioned me by name. The phrasing wasn't accurate. I came straight to HR and reported the distribution error. Denise didn't breathe for a full second. Then she closed her notebook. "Before this meeting continues," she said carefully, "I need to verify some information." That was the moment everything truly shifted, because Laura, the manager who'd always had Matt's back, turned pale, and Matt looked like someone had yanked a rug out from under his chair. "Denise," he said, forcing a laugh that cracked midway, "we don't need to make a whole thing out of—" "We do," she cut in. Her tone had changed completely. Lower, firmer. "We absolutely do." She stood up. "I'm pausing this conversation pending review of project documentation and system logs. No further discussion until we confirm the accuracy of the performance concerns." Laura tried to recover. I think that's unnecessary. We can still—" "No," Denise said. "We can't." Her eyes shifted to Matt. "And you," she added, "should not leave the building." He froze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't say anything at all. But inside, something clicked into place. Clean, precise, inevitable. For the first time in months, the truth wasn't something I had to defend. It was something I could watch unfold. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. And now the story they'd written without me was starting to fall apart from the inside. As Denise left the room, calling someone from compliance, the remaining silence wasn't awkward. It was the sound of something cracking, slowly, methodically, like ice under too much weight. Chaos was coming, but it was a kind of chaos I could finally breathe in. Denise didn't come back for the rest of the day. Not to the conference room, not to her desk, not to quietly pull me aside. When I finally left the building that evening, her office light was still off. A closed laptop sitting exactly where she'd left it when she stood up and walked out to call compliance. By the next morning, everything had changed. Compliance moved fast, faster than anyone expected. They pulled system logs, email archives, version histories, access records. And because our company had strict audit protocols, every action Matt had taken, every deadline he'd moved, every file he'd altered, every message he'd selectively quoted, was time-stamped and preserved. It didn't take them long. What took longer was watching the fallout ripple through the office. I arrived at my desk at 8:42 a.m. Matt's chair was still empty, but this time his monitor was dark, not asleep, locked out. No one said anything directly, but the atmosphere was different. Conversations were shorter. Glances lasted half a second too long. People weren't sure what they'd heard or what they were supposed to pretend not to know. At 9:10, Laura walked past my desk. Her face looked stiff, like she was trying to hold all its muscles in place by force. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked straight into a meeting room with one of the directors and closed the door. I didn't need to guess who the meeting was about. By noon, the internal announcement dropped. Temporary reassignment of project oversight, pending review. No names, no details. But everyone understood. I kept my head down, finished the tasks in my queue, kept my communication clean and minimal. Not out of fear, but because the investigation didn't need my help. The truth was already documenting itself. 2 days later, Denise finally called me into her office. She closed the door gently, not with the tight, controlled motion HR people use when they know a storm is coming, but with something closer to relief. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "I didn't have much choice," I replied. A small smile tugged at her mouth, not amused, just acknowledging reality. "We completed the review," she said, "and I want to walk you through the findings." She didn't hand me documents, didn't slide papers across the desk. Everything she said next was clean, formal, but unmistakably human. The timeline they reconstructed matched mine exactly. The delays, traced to decisions made by Matt and approved verbally by Laura, never documented the way they should have been. The risk escalation, proven by system logs. I had raised the alert and it had been ignored. The manipulated quotes in the internal statements, those came from emails Matt had edited before forwarding. He'd trimmed lines, removed context, stitch things together to make it look like I'd been refusing instructions. And the complaints from clients, most hadn't been about me at all. He'd rerouted responses, handled issues himself, then written summaries that assigned blame where it was convenient. I listened without interrupting, not because I didn't have questions, but because every answer she gave filled in the one blank I'd carried for months. It was never incompetence. It was never poor communication. It was never me. Finally, she reached the part they'd saved for last. As of this morning, she said, Matt has been terminated for misconduct involving documentation falsification, misrepresentation of project responsibilities, and breach of compliance policy. I stayed still, no reaction, no satisfaction curling across my face. I felt quiet. And regarding management, she continued carefully, a separate action has been taken. Effective immediately, Laura is removed from her managerial role. She will remain with the company pending further review, but she will no longer supervise staff. That hit harder than Matt's firing, not because I sympathized, but because it confirmed something bigger. Someone had been keeping score, just not the way I feared, she went on. As for you, she said, your record has been formally cleared. None of the concerns raised will be included in your evaluation. We recognize the situation placed you in an unfair position, and we want to correct that. I exhaled slowly. And your options, she added, sliding a folder forward, are these: a promotion and transfer to a different team with a salary adjustment, or, if you prefer, we'll support an external move with a recommendation letter reflecting your actual performance. I didn't decide immediately. I took the folder, thanked her, and stepped out into the hallway, into an office that suddenly felt too small, too familiar, too filled with echoes of what had almost happened. That evening at home, I sat at my kitchen table, long after the sun had gone down, reading both offers again and again. A promotion would have been a victory. Staying would have proven I could outlast them. But I wasn't interested in victories anymore. I wasn't interested in outlasting anyone. I wanted space that hadn't already tried to bury me. So I chose the external move. 3 weeks later, I accepted an offer from a company that valued documentation, clarity, accountability, the things I'd been punished for holding on to. My recommendation letter, it was the kind people frame. On my last day, I walked past Matt's old desk, empty. Not a trace left, just a faint outline on the carpet where his chair used to sit. Laura didn't come to say goodbye. Denise did, quietly, without ceremony. And when I stepped out of the building for the last time, the sky was overcast, the air cool, the kind of weather that makes you breathe deeper without thinking. Not relief, not triumph, just peace, the kind you get only after you've stopped waiting for fairness and started building it yourself. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need justice with fireworks. The truth had done what it always does when someone finally stops hiding it. It settled, cleanly, completely, and without leaving anything unfinished.